In this episode of FPTV, we're going to be discussing the single-use plastic ban mandate and how this will affect you. How goes it, good people? My name is Elash P, and you're watching Food Packaging TV, where we bring you the latest in innovation, industry news, and of course, food packaging. Now let's hit it! And by that I mean the like, share, and subscribe buttons. Now hit it! To give you background of where our information is coming from, we'd like to acknowledge two authorized bodies where today's content is being collected and presented. The first is the Government of Canada website that has the Single-Use Plastic Prohibition Regulations overview. Now this link is in the description below, and this webpage is designed to give you a high-level summary of the regulations, but it doesn't include all the legal requirements. The second source is the Canada Gazette, Part 2, Volume 156, Number 13. Now, it's been noted on the Government of Canada's website that if there's any inconsistencies or conflict between the Government of Canada's webpage and the Canada Gazette Part 2 text, the Canada Gazette text will prevail. So, we've deferred most of our research to the CG. See the description and link below. So, let's get right on to it, shall we? We shall. To begin, we need to understand why we even need this type of regulation in Canada. Are there issues with single-use plastics? Sure, there are definitely areas in which we can improve in North America, which combined is one of the most heaviest amounts of single-use plastic product consumption in the world. But specifically at the Canadian economy, although it's smaller in size compared to that of US and A, we also generate large amounts of waste every year, which a certain proportion of the plastics enter the environment as plastic pollution. SUP. One of the most commonly abbreviated words in the document are the letters SUP, SUP, or single-use plastics, and of course, they are the significant contributors to the plastic pollution, as they're designed to be discarded once the single use has been fulfilled. So the CG rightly pointed out that our duty to prevent such pollution and waste is an important shared jurisdiction amongst various levels of the government in Canada, and that plastic pollution is an issue with national and international dimensions that can't be effectively eliminated through provincial or territorial or local measures alone. And rightly so. This is a global citizen matter. Therefore, the Minister of Environment and the Minister of Health, from now on we'll just call them the ministers, in accordance with the Section 93 of the Canadian Environmental Protection Act 1999, CEPA, recommended that the Governor in Council eliminate or restrict 6 categories of SUPs subject to regulations. And these categories of SUPs are the following. Single-use plastic checkout bags means a plastic manufactured item made entirely or in part from plastic that is formed in the shape of a bag and is designed to carry purchased good from a business, and whose A, plastic is not fabric as defined in Section 2 of the Textile Labeling Act, or B, whose plastic is a fabric as defined in Section 2 of the Textile Labeling Act that will break or tear if the bag is 1. Used to carry 10 kilograms over a distance of 53 meters 100 times. Where did these numbers come from? And why 53 meters and 100 times? But it gets more bizarre. Part 2. It's wash in accordance with the washing procedure specified in a single domestic wash in the International Organization Standards ISO 6330, entitled Textiles Domestic Washing and Drying Procedures for Textile Testing, and amended from time to time. In other words, if the bag can't be washed at home with your standard dishwasher, then it's considered SUP. The next one is single-use plastic cutlery. It means a plastic manufactured item made entirely or in part from plastic that is formed in the shape of a fork, a knife, a spoon, spork, or chopstick that A, contains polystyrene or polyethylene, or B, changes its physical properties after being run through an electrically operated household dishwasher 100 times. Number 3 is the food service ware made from or containing problematic plastics. Single-use plastic foodware means a plastic manufactured item made entirely or in part from plastic that is A, in a form of a shape of a clamshell, container, lidded container, box, plate, cup, bowl, etc. B, is designed for serving, transporting food or beverage that is ready to be consumed. And C, contains expanded polystyrene foam, extruded polystyrene foam, polyvinyl chloride, a plastic that contains a black pigment produced through a partial or incomplete combustion of hydrocarbons, or an oxo-biodegradable plastic. Wow. The next item is a single-use plastic ring carrier, meaning a plastic manufactured item made entirely or in part from plastic that is formed in a series of shapes of deformable rings or bands that are designed to surround beverage containers in order to carry them together. Number 4 are the single-use plastic stir sticks. So this is a plastic manufactured item made entirely or in part from plastic that is designed to stir mixed beverages or to prevent beverages from spilling from the lid of its container. And lastly, we have single-use plastic flexible straws, meaning a single-use plastic straw that has a corrugated section that allows for the straw to bend and maintain its position at various angles. And a single-use plastic straw, meaning a plastic manufactured item made entirely or in part from plastic that is in the form of a shape of a drinking straw, and that A, contains polystyrene or polyethylene, or B, changes its physical properties after being run through an electronically operated household dishwasher 100 times. Hereafter, we'll just refer to the 6 categories of SUPs as SUPs. But let's stick with the straws for a second, because I found this category rather interesting. Tongue twister. Check out the full definition of the prohibition of sale of single-use plastic straws. A person must not sell a single-use plastic straw except in the following situations. So the exceptions are sale in certain settings. So a person may sell a single-use plastic flexible straw in a non-commercial, non-industrial, non-institutional setting. Another exception is business to business. A business may also sell a package of 20 or more single-use plastic flexible straws to another business. In the retail setting, a retail store may sell a package of 20 or more single-use plastic flexible straws to a customer if the customer requests a straw, and the package is not displayed in a manner that permits the customer to view the package without the help of a store employee. Are straws the new cigarettes? The data that was pulled for the analysis of this report found that cigarette butts were always in the top 10 list. Most of the time in the top 2 percentile of the litter commonly found. Get this, most of the top 10 reported in the Ocean Conservancy International Coastal Cleanup 2020 report, in which Canada participated, were made out of or contained plastics, and these items included food wrappers, cigarette filters, plastic beverage bottles, and other unspecified trash. Similarly, the database on total items collected over time in the European Environment Agency shows that the most common categories of items found as marine litter on the beach are cigarette filters, number 1, plastic caps, drink lids, shopping bags, other items, food wrappers, etc. Domestically, the Great Canadian Shoreline Cleanup has also typically found cigarette filters, food wrappers, bottle caps, plastic bags, plastic bottles, and straws amongst its top 10 most commonly collected litter items. Ciggies have zero net benefits to the environment and, of course, to our health. And what about the financial burden to our healthcare system? Why not ban cigarettes and help the air pollution and the marine life, coastal life, and human health? Having straws treated as deadly cigarettes? Yep, we have our priorities straight. And who is in charge of our ethics committee? Can someone tell me that? So now that we have a background as to why we require regulations and to which categories these directly impact, let's drill deeper into the regulations and understand in what capacities and in which industries these regulations will directly affect. The SUP, Prohibition Regulations, or the regulations, will prohibit the manufacture, import, and sale, including for the purpose of exports, of these 6 SUP categories with the temporary exemption for exports. The regulations also provide exemptions for SUP flexible straws to accommodate with persons with disabilities. What is interesting to note are that some of these categories have reusable plastic substitutes available, and there are regulation standards to identify performance standards to differentiate between a single-use item and a reusable item for these 3 SUP categories. So, SUP checkout bags, SUP cutlery, and SUP straws. And what kind of standards? Well, the only criteria I came across was the ability for the SUPs to either be run through a standard home dishwasher 100 times or be carried over 53 meters 100 times to be considered reusable. How many people do you know that wash their straws in a dishwasher or count the specific distance of 53 meters and hold a use count of 100 times, Sounds like a cool idea for an app though. Smart bags that can have an app and capture the data of how many meters you've traveled and how heavy it is with the activation. You know what I mean? I'm just saying, it's rambling here. For categories of stir sticks, ring carriers, or food service ware made from or containing problematic plastics, there are no reusable criteria, as these categories actually meet the definitions of the regulations and are expected to be single use. So let's talk about the prohibition timelines and the regulations once they're registered. So the first prohibition timeline. This revolves around on manufacturing and import of the 6 subcategories, which will come into force 6 months after the regulations have been registered. The second timeline pertains to the prohibition of sale of these items, which will come into force 18 months after the regulations are registered. However, sub-flexible straws will not be subject to the prohibition and manufacture or import, as there is a need to ensure these supply items for people who need them, but their sale will be subjected to special rules that will come into force 18 months after regulation. But they left me hanging, as nowhere did I see or did they mention, not that I could find on any of the pages anyway, such special rules and where to find them, nor have they mentioned what the criteria are to be considered to be a special manufacturer or the importer of sub-flexible straws. The prohibition on the manufacture and import of sub-ring carriers will come into force 12 months after the regulations are registered. So why the staggered startup? I give up. You tell me in the comments. The prohibition on sale for sub-ring carriers, as well as the repeal, meaning taking away, of the temporary exemption on the sale of sub-flexible straws packaged together with beverage containers, will come into force 24 months after the regulations are registered. Or in other words, you've got a juice box with a straw, they have a special pass to be able to sell their products 24 months after the regulations are in effect. The regulations will also repeal the temporary exemption on manufacture, import, and sale for the purposes of export of the subcategories for 42 months after regulations are registered. This is an interesting one. If you're a manufacturer or importer and you manufacture or import for the purposes of exporting, so like, for example, you're selling goods to the United States or elsewhere, you have an exemption to continue operations for another 3.5 years. So what are the results that the government is looking to achieve? On the manufacturing end, the regulations are expected to result in a net decrease of approximately 1.3 million tons of plastic waste over a 10-year analytical period, so from 2023 to 2032. And this represents around 3% of the total estimated plastic waste that's generated in Canada each year. And overall, they also expect to have a result of a decrease of about 22,000 tons in plastic pollution over the same period, which represents around 5% of the total plastic pollution generated each year. So what do these bans mean for restaurant owners and the final customer? Well, with the restaurants forced to find substitutes for their takeout products, the overall uptick in cost is expected to result in a $2 billion increase at today's cost of goods over the same 10-year period. The CG also notes that even though these costs are significant in the aggregate overall, they will be widely dispersed across Canadian consumers, around $5 per capita. In other words, they're saying that it will cost each and every single Canadian, including infants, $5 per year over the 10-year period, as the cost would be dispersed over Canadian consumers, but also the tourists, because they'll have to have a bite too. If you're a manufacturer that has these prohibitions across the 6 categories of subs, it's also expected to result in $176 million in the cost to Canadian manufacturers over that same 10-year analytical period. By reducing plastic pollution, the regulations are also expected to reduce the risk of ecological harm to wildlife and their habitats, as well as increase Canadians' enjoyment of nature. And while these benefits are not monetized in our analysis, they're expected to be significant given the harms associated with plastic pollution. The analysis did monetize benefits associated with the avoided cost of terrestrial litter cleanup and avoided marine plastic pollution cleanup, which is about $616 million in present value over the next 10 years. But wait. What about bioplastics? PLA, CPLA, PSM, cornstarch. What about MFPP? Or in other words, non-conventional plastics. The proposed regulations did not differentiate between a non-conventional, i.e. a plant-based product, versus a conventional, plastic made from petroleum-derived feedstock. Manufacturers of compostable plastic disagreed with this approach, stating it would hinder innovation growth in this sector, that compostable plastic brings to the environmental benefits that would incur economic losses. However, municipal and provincial governments, as well as recyclers and NGO, were mostly supportive, but they also stated the existing composting and recycling infrastructure is unable to process non-conventional plastics in a cost-effective manner. They urged the government to also prohibit food service ware made from non-conventional plastics. Wah, wah. I don't agree with this approach on the plant-based plastics, as the correct infrastructure, or with the correct infrastructure, it can be cash flow positive, but real solutions and government support is required. There can be many great uses for plant-based plastics if we build the infrastructure. They will come. The department recognizes the potential advantages of replacing single-use items made from conventional plastics with non-conventional plastics. Some of these benefits could include reducing fossil fuel consumption when plant-based materials replace carbon-intensive plastic source and materials, and increasing food waste diversion in situations where contamination of plastics may present an obstacle to recycling. The department also recognized that the benefits must be weighed against current performance in compost facilities where non-conventional plastics typically cannot be processed and are sent to landfills. When you say typically cannot be processed, I'd like to know under what circumstances and duration of time, because as far as the ASTM standards go, the bioplastics are absolutely able to break down if given the correct environment, and not just being pushed through so that the composters can get a faster turnover to yield more compost. And if they want a higher grade of compost or call it organic, they can't have any contamination or bioplastics. So yeah, strictly from an economical standpoint, yeah, I understand their business model to make money. I get that. But on the flip side, there also has to be a responsibility to do your level best and serve your community and our people. So please reconsider and recreate this environment to accept bioplastics. In addition, while compostable plastics look very similar to the conventional plastics they replace, many are not designed to be recyclable. Mixing of compostable and conventional plastics can contaminate the recycling stream and reduce recycling recovery rates. And yeah, 100%. I can't argue at this point. They practically look identical. However, if you mandate to manufacture and import Titans to only keep bioplastics in the loop, then does it not eliminate the problem of bioplastics versus plastics? The science assessment noted a lack of significant evidence that biodegradable, compostable, bio-based, and oxo-degradable plastics will fully degrade in a natural environment. But that's why we have bodies like ASTM that standardize these tests for compostability of various materials. That the government or the bodies did not consult BPI or CMA. Accordingly, the regulations will treat single-use items made from non-conventional plastics in the same manner as their conventional plastic counterparts. The department is working with partner stakeholders, including provinces and territories, to develop the knowledge base about non-conventional plastics, which will inform future actions to promote innovation, clean growth, and circularity for this sector for its applications outside the items prohibited by these regulations, which means what really? Hopefully you guys can ping me too. Another area of interest was over the topic of businesses selling or offering any of these 6 categories of subs. Now listen to this. According to the CG, the department estimated that regulations could impact up to 250,000 businesses selling or offering any of these 6 subcategories in Canada, of which 242,000 are considered to be small businesses as defined by the Treasury Board's Secretariat's Policy on Regulatory Development. Yeah, that's a thing. And out of these 242,000 businesses, approximately 40% of these are in retail sector, and therefore mostly impacted by the regulations through the ban of self-checkout bags. Some of these businesses sell at least one of the 6 categories of subs directly to the consumer. These businesses will be able to sell single-use or reusable substitutes instead, and therefore should not be impacted by the regulatory prohibitions. I'm confused. Are we not allowed to sell self-checkout bags, or are we? I mean, 40%, 242,000 businesses, that means 96,800 businesses will be or may be allowed to sell self-checkout bags. And what about the food service sector? Nothing. Well, in the hospitality and food services sector, which represent around 35% of the businesses that still potentially sell or offer any of the 6 subcategories, many of these businesses are expected to sell more than one of these 6 categories. And for example, a quick service restaurant could be offering sup checkout bags, sup cutlery, sup food serviceware made from or containing problematic plastics, sup stir sticks, and sup straws. But I didn't read any other exclusions for these group of businesses. But the healthcare and social assistance sector compromises about 15% of the potentially affected businesses, where businesses will still be able to offer flexible plastic straws to the patients or residents that require it. The remaining 10% is split between the art, entertainment, and recreation sector, the transportation sector, and the wholesale trade sector. Now, what about importers? How do the regulations affect them? Now, based on the Canadian Importers Database, the department estimated 128 unique businesses potentially imported at least one of the 6 categories of the SUPs in 2019, of which 41 of these businesses are considered to be small businesses, which is 32%. Now, out of these 128 businesses, 44% only import one category of the SUPs, 10% import 2 categories, 17% import 3 categories, and 29% import 4 or more categories. That's huge. So the impact of regulations on businesses importing any of these 6 categories of SUPs will be minimal, as these businesses could switch supply lines to import single-use or reusable items, substitutes that could comply with the regulations. Here are some of the proposed substitutions for the 6 SUP categories. For the checkout bags, you can use reusable non-woven polypropylene, reusable woven polypropylene, reusable recycled polyethylene terephthalate, reusable polyester, single-use paper, and reusable cotton bags. For cutlery, you can do single-use wood, reusable metal, or reusable plastic. For food service ware made from or containing problematic plastics, you can use single-use wood pulp, single-use paper, single-use compostable plastic, single-use aluminum, single-use propylene, and reusable porcelain. For ring carriers, you can use single-use low-density polyethylene shrink wrap, single-use high-density polyethylene rigid snap-on lid carriers, single-use paperboard box, single-use fiber ring carriers. For stir sticks, you can use single-use wood, reusable metal spoons, and for straws, you can use single-use paper, reusable wood, reusable metal, reusable glass. In the study, they also looked at the environmental impact. After all, this is why we're putting such mandates together in the first place, to see how these bans will play out downstream. So let's talk about them. Climate change. Some substitutes, such as those made from paper, may produce greenhouse gases such as methane in certain conditions, for example, when decomposing in landfills. Greenhouse gases may also result from transporting waste substitutes, for example, to landfill or recycling facilities. And substitutes with higher recycling rates, for example, paper products, will result in lower greenhouse gases emissions due to avoided emissions from displacing virgin materials. So the conclusion is there's no significant environmental effects. Air quality. Air quality effects depends on end-of-life management methods. Incineration, with or without electricity generation, of either SUPs or substitutes may affect the air quality. However, given that substitutes are typically more recyclable or have significantly longer lifespans, incineration is not expected to be a major endpoint for substitutes in the downstream stage of this life cycle. So the conclusion is potential negative or potential positive environmental effects. Water quality. The science assessment shows that water quality will be impacted by plastic pollutions through, among other things, the release of micro and macroplastic particles, including from SUPs as they are fragmented and degrade into the natural environment. So removing SUP items as a source of plastic pollution will eliminate their impact on water quality. Conclusion being, significant positive environmental effects. Water usage. More recyclable substitutes could use water as part of their recycling process, including to wash or sort materials, but this is not expected to be significant in the context of increasing recycling activity through other instruments such as extended producer responsibility being implemented in provinces and territories. This is where we're talking about Ontario Stewardship Program. The conclusion being potential negative or positive environmental effects. I don't know why they go both ways. Which one is it? Is it negative or is it positive? I would like a firm answer, wouldn't you? Terrestrial environmental quality. The science assessment shows that, among other things, plastic particles are retained in the soil for long periods of time, and that macroplastics can harm vegetation through effects such as smothering. Littered SUPs will be expected to contribute such environmental harm more than reusable plastic substitutes and much more than non-plastic substitutes. So the conclusion being, there's a significant positive environmental effect. Biodiversity. SUPs are more prevalent in the environment than any substitute and pose a greater threat to wildlife than any other substitute. All evidence sources show that substitutes to SUPs are significantly better for wildlife in terms of their threats of harm posed by litter. Elimination or restriction of the 6 categories of SUPs will remove a significant threat of harm. Conclusion being, significant positive environmental effect. In terms of end-of-life outcomes at the downstream stage, each of the categories of SUPs targeted by the regulations has low recycling rates, less than 15%, as well as barriers increasing their recycling rate. They're also expected to have no potential for other forms of value recovery such as reuse, repair, remanufacture, or refurbishment. And by contrast, substitutes have high potential of value recovery through recycling, i.e. products made from paper for reusing, reusable bags, cutlery, etc. that meet the performance standard established by the regulations. Remember, 100 washes or 53 meters of walking 100 times. Yeah. So here are the rules for reusable products. So the substitute must be used many times before its environmental impacts equal or become less than those of the SUPs. And these regulations require a mandate minimum performance standard for reusable plastic checkout bags, cutlery, and straws. And these performance standards will ensure that the reusable substitutes made of plastic could be reused enough times to minimize or negate many of the negative environmental effects identified at the upstream stage of the product life cycle. So in other words, all the discussion that we've had over reusing something 100 times maybe in the dishwasher or walking at 53 meters 100 times, these are the types of items that they're looking for in order to minimize your impact. So what happens if you don't comply with these regulations in accordance with the Compliance Act? What happens? Let's talk about enforcement. The regulations will be made under CEPA. So enforcement officers will, when verifying compliance with the Regulations Act in accordance with the compliance of the entire CEPA 1999, the verification of compliance with the regulations will include site visits, review of records, reusable product testing if applicable, and a review of written transit documents. Following an inspection or an investigation, if an enforcement officer discovers an alleged violation, the officer will choose the appropriate enforcement action based on the following factors as outlined in the CEPA documentation. What is the nature of the alleged violation? This includes consideration of the damage or the intent of the alleged violator, whether it is a repeat violation or whether an attempt has been made to conceal information or otherwise subvert the objectives of the requirements of CEPA. Effectiveness in achieving the desired result with the alleged violator. The desired result of the compliance is within the shortest possible time with no further repetition of the violation. And factors to be considered include the violator's history of compliance with CEPA and the willingness to cooperate with the enforcement officers and evidence of corrective action already taken. And consistency. Enforcement officers will consider how similar situations have been handled, determining the measures to be taken to enforce CEPA. Subject to the enforcement of the officer's discretion, the following responses are available to deal with alleged violations of CEPA and its regulations. So you can get a warning, directions, tickets, ministerial orders, environmental protection compliance orders, detention of orders or shipments, injunctions, prosecutions, environmental protection alternative measures, and court orders following convictions and civil suits by the Crown to recover costs. Like, do you really want to go through that? Contact Matthew Watkinson, Director of the Regulatory Analysis of Valuation Division, Environment and Climate Change Canada. I've left his contact details below. And you can also contact Tracey Spack, Director of Plastics Regulatory Affairs Division, Environment and Climate Change Canada. Again, her contact details are below. Should you have any further questions or comments, based on what we discussed today. And that's gonna do it for this week's episode of Food Packaging TV. Thank you for joining me. My name is Ilash P. Next week we'll be looking at the Go Lids, a brand new style of lid/container. Yeah, you're gonna love this one. Please feel free to subscribe, like, share, and comment. And we'll see you same place, same time. Peace out! The SUP Prohibition regulations. Another area of interest was over the topic of businesses selling or offering any of the... What am I doing here? I'm itching my nose.